Welcome back, friends. We had a couple new codexes drop last week and actually had some new interesting data here to go through. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you like the video, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really like the video, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all my latest videos. If you're looking for any other ways to help support the channel, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/warpfriends. Link is in the description below. Any help is greatly appreciated. All right, guys, let's get started. We'll take a quick look at the player numbers for the previous week. So last week we had 797 players, bringing the Dataslate total up to 9,299. For the games played, we had 3,955, and for the Dataslate, we're sitting at 48,412. And we had 21 tournaments last week, bringing the Dataslate total up to 179. And the first chart we're going to look at this week is the win percentage by armies for the previous week. So just a quick reminder, Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. Anything in that range will be in green. Anything 5% above or below will be in orange. Anything above or below that will be in red. So coming in number one last week was Imperial Agents with 83.3%. And then we had Death Guard at 58%, Drukhari at 55.1%, Blood Angels at 54.8%, Genestealer Cults at 53.8%, and then we had Imperial Knights and Space Wolves both at 52.8%. Then down at the bottom there, we had Deathwatch at 38.8%, we had Astra Militarum at 39.6%, Orcs at 40.3%, Space Marines at 40.3%, and Sisters of Battle at 40.7%. So the arrows, they show the change versus the previous week for each army, so you can get an idea how each army moved up and down from the previous week. So it was finally a good week for that one Agents player. Every week they seem to be down around the 30 to 35%, but this week they went 5 for 6 at a tournament and had an 83% win rate. So, good for them. Finally top of the charts there. Drukhari's riding that wave they always seem to be on. 1 week up, 1 week down. This week was their up week, and they had a 55% win rate, so that's really good. And taking a look at some of the armies that got some new codexes here. Black Templars in the middle there, they had a 51.4% win rate, so that was really good for them. Good first showing. And then down at the bottom, unfortunately, we had Grey Knights at a 42.6% win rate, so kind of the opposite tale there. There was the first week of the new codex, and it didn't really pan out, and that's kind of what I think everyone was sort of expecting. People were okay on the Black Templars Codex. It looked pretty good, but not like game-breaking. But everyone was pretty down on the Grey Knights. I don't think there was too much hype that they were going to come out of the gates running there. So we'll see how they pick up in the next few weeks. It might take a little bit to sort of find what works for them. But right off the start, not the best. Space Wolves, another army, recently got a Codex. They're still going pretty strong there, 52.8% win rate. Tied for Knights this week. Knights went down a little bit. Death Guard did go up quite a bit, 58%. That's a pretty high rating this week. They actually had quite a few less players. We'll get into that in the slides coming up here. Overall, this chart looks the same as it really has. Some armies swap places week over week, like we have Votan, Emperor's Children. Sisters of Battle this week had a pretty down week at 40%, so they're down near the bottom. Then we have some armies who had been struggling, like Tau. They're back up near the top at 50%, so they had a decent week this week. So, it flip-flops a few armies here and there, but overall, it's usually fairly imbalanced. Now, the Imperial Agents at 83% is kind of compressing everything else to make it look a little more even than it is, but it's about the same as it's always been. All right, next up is the army representation. So this is the percentage of players who play each army. So if everyone played every army equally, it would be about 3.7, 3.6%. So you give you an idea of what the average is. So coming in number one last week, we had Death Guard at 7.4%. We had Imperial Knights at 5.9%, Chaos Knights at 5.5%, Space Marines at 5.3%, and then we had World Eaters at 5.1%. And down at the bottom, we have Agents at 0.1%, Deathwatch at 1.1%, AdMech at 1.4%, and then we had Sisters and Votan both at 2%. So this chart actually looks quite a bit different than it has in the previous weeks. Death Guard down about 3% versus last week. They were just over 10.2, 10.3 last week, so down to 7.4%. So that's quite a big drop. Imperial Knights stayed about the same. They're around 6%, and Chaos Knights about the same as well, but that 3% drop from Death Guard, it kind of filtered down into the Templar and to the Grey Knight players. So Black Templars up to 3.5%. I don't think we've seen them above like 1.2 since this Dataslate drop, and they're up to 3.5%. So people were obviously pretty excited to bust out those Black Templar armies when the Codex dropped. And same for Grey Knights, 3.1%. They've been an army down underneath 2% for the longest time. So again, even though the Codex wasn't very hyped up, the Grey Knight players dusted it off the shelf and brought it out and didn't get the greatest results, but we'll see if they can sort of adapt and find what works coming up. Space Wolves, another army that just got a Codex, around 3%, which is pretty good. They could be a little bit better, but I think there's just so many players being sucked up by the top three armies there, both Knights armies and the Death Guard army, that once the Dataslate drops and some nerfs come out, I think they'll be able to filter down a little bit here, and we'll see some armies that are usually higher up in the rankings sort of pop back up a little bit. So overall this week was a lot more balanced than it normally is. There's a lot more green right throughout the middle there, and a lot less armies down in the orange and especially in the red. We only have 2 armies below 2%, and agents is always down below there, so I don't really count them in this regard. But normally we've seen a lot more armies down there on the 1 to like 1.5%. So it's nice to see some of those armies get popped back up and take a little bit off the top there, because that was getting a little bit ridiculous having Death Guard at a 10% week over week. That's far too many Death Guard players. Moving on is the combined stats for the previous weeks. We have Army win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. So just a quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who went undefeated or only lost 1 game in a tournament. So an example of 5-0 or 4-1. It's not a perfect stat, but it's a good way to look at how an army's doing power-wise and how well they're performing versus their win rate. So the higher XOX1 percentage, the more likely you see them at the top tables and better chance to win tournaments. And the lower the XOX1, the less chance you see them at the top tables and the less chance you see it win tournaments. So coming in number 1, Imperial Agents. Then we had Death Guard at number 2, Drukhari at number 3, and we had Knights at number 4, and Space Wolves at number 5. And down the bottom we had Death Watch, Orcs, Asher Militarum, AdMech, and then Leagues of Votann. So it was a really good week for that one Agents player. He went 5 for 6 at a tournament, so he had 100% XOX1 and an 83% win rate. So it does kind of skew the chart a little bit. It compresses everything down, kind of hides some of the differences between some of the armies, but you can get a good idea here. Death Guard also had a really good week, so their representation dropped 3%, but their XOX1 percentage was 40%. So despite having less players, they had a lot better results, which I think is kind of what you would expect to see. Some of those players who were bandwagon jumping and just hopping on there at the end to play the really powerful army probably dragged their stats down a little bit and kind of masked how good they really were, because if you have a bunch of players who are not really used to it and kind of underperforming, it's going to drag the stats down. Now that the percentage is 3% less, we're actually seeing much better results. 40% XOX1 is pretty wild, considering they have the highest percentage representation across all armies, almost over double the average, and they still had almost half their players do really, really well. So there's definitely a lot broken within that codex, but that's not surprising to anybody. And based on the rumors, they're going to get hit pretty good in the next Dataslate. Drukhari had another good week at 2.3% representation. It's not bad for Drukhari in the state they're currently in without a codex. 33% XOX1 is really good. And not surprising they have a 55% win rate to go with it. Looking at the Black Templars there, 3.5% rep, like I said, really good, pretty much bang on the average. 25% XOX1, quite a bit above the average, considering the average is about 15 to 17% week over week. And it did translate to only a 51% win rate. You would expect to see that win rate a little bit higher based on their XOX1, but it's the first week and everyone's kind of figuring stuff out. So if a few people underperform here and there, and it's going to drag the win rate down a little bit. Overall, really good week for the first week for the codex there, and hopefully they can build on that and keep it up going forward. So Grey Knights, kind of the opposite side of it there. They had a 3.1% rep, a little bit below the average, but not too bad. Pretty good numbers there. 16% XOX1, so it's actually pretty much average. So all things considered, it performed fairly average. The issue is the win percentage. So the people who didn't perform well at a tournament kind of performed really poorly. So it looks like right now there's a select group of people who are finding success and everyone else is struggling pretty hard with that. So hopefully those people who struggled last week will be able to sort of find their footing, find what works. And if they can get a few more wins, they can bump that win percentage up to 46, 47, 48%, and that'll look a lot more respectable. Sisters, after many weeks of being up near the top, they had a pretty rough week this week. Win percentage-wise, it was rough, but XOX1 was actually above average, so it looks like it was just a case of kind of like Grey Knights, where there's a select few group of people who struggled a lot, and it kind of dragged that win percentage down. Overall, there's really not too much else to really point out here. Most armies seem to have a pretty decent week. So there's only 4 armies below 10% XOX1 this week, so that's not too bad. We had AdMech, Asher Militarum, Orcs, and Deathwatch, and they've all kind of been down there for the whole data slate, so it's not really anything out of the ordinary. And hopefully when the data slate drops, we can get some buffs and we can bring them up a little bit, because anyone sitting down that low is in for a really rough go of it. It's not really fun to play them right now, especially Orcs. 3.9% representation and 0% XOX1. That is miserable. The Orc players are having a real rough time right now. Okay, now we're going to look at the tournament wins for each army last week. So coming in number 1, we had Death Guard with 3 wins. Then we had Blood Angels with 3 as well. And then we had 4 armies with 2 wins. We had Drukhari, Chaos Demons, Black Templars, and Adeptus Custodes. Then we had Tau, Necrons, Leagues of Votann, Imperial Knights, Dark Angels, Chaos Knights, and AdMech all picking up 1 win each. So Black Templars picked up 2 wins for, the first week with their Codex. That's nice to see. Get a couple wins under their belt. So AdMech had a pretty rough week, but they still managed to pull a tournament win. So one of their players performed pretty well. And then Dark Angels is an army who has been performing a little bit poorly to moderate for most of this data slate, but they did get a win this week, so that's nice to see. All right, next up is the tournament wins for each sub-faction, so we can kind of break down how each army is getting their wins. So for Death Guard, Mortanian's Hammer picked up all 3 of their wins, and for Blood Angels, it was Liberator Assault Group. For Black Templars, it was actually Gladius Taskforce, so they didn't get any of the wins with their Codex-specific detachments, so we'll have to see how that plays out going forward. If the Black Templar players are just going to keep using the sort of Space Marine Codex detachments and not their own, it could be a little bit of a problem there. You would like that the sort of flavor-specific detachments are viable and usable, kind of give that codex its own feel rather than just playing a different colored Space Marine, basically. A win is a win, and it's good to see, and hopefully we can get a couple wins here and there with some of the other detachments. For Tau, Crude Hunting Pack picked up a win. It's always fun to see them get one, and Halo Screed Battleclade picked one up for AdMech. All right, the next chart we're going to take a look at is the current data slate win percentage by army. So this is the last 10 weeks of data here. So coming in number 1, we have Imperial Knights at 56.2%, and then we have Death Guard at 54.6%. Chainsaw Cults at 52.6%, Chaos Knights at 52.5%, and then Thousand Sons at 51.6%. Down at the bottom, we have Agents at 35.8%, Orcs at 41.9%, Space Marines at 42.7%, Grey Knights at 44%, and then we have Tau at 45.2%. So despite the sort of changes this week, not really much change in this chart. It's been 10 weeks of data, so it takes a lot to sort of bump anything around too much at this point. Imperial Knights still in first place. Death Guard with a really good week, though, did climb very close to popping over 55%. And I think there might be one more week at this data slate. It's hard to say, but we could see them pop over if they have one more good week. Black Templars, now that's an army that actually did jump up quite a bit. So they jumped up to 46.5%. It's over 2% versus the previous week. Now, a lot of that is because they had such few players and they had so many players this week that there was enough influx of players that it actually made a sizable difference in their overall record. Now, it's a little too late for them to sort of prop back up into the average there. One more good week and they could be up to 47%. I think moving forward in the next data slate, they're going to be in a much healthier spot. The bottom is sort of fixing itself down there where Black Templars were down below the 45%. They're way clear of that now, and now it's just Grey Knights at 44, and I don't see them doing enough in the next week or two to sort of prop up over 45%. Space Marines and Orcs are going nowhere. The only really risk there is Deathwatch and Tau. Tau had a decent week, so it brought them up. Deathwatch did have a very poor week, but there's so few players that they might skate by and stay at 45%. But, I mean, at that point, you're splitting hairs between bad and like really bad. So it is what it is. Overall, the chart looks how it always looks. Nothing too surprising here. It is nice to see that Templars' success did pay off a little bit, but it does kind of mask how poorly they did for the first 9 weeks. So next up is the current army representation for the data slate. So this is the last 10 weeks of data for army representation. So just a quick reminder, the average is about 3.7%. So you can get a good idea of how many players are playing each army for the current data slate. Death Guard is number 1 at 9.1%, and then we have Imperial Knights at 6.3%, Tyranids at 5.4%, Chaos Knights at 5.3%, and Space Marines at 5.1%. And then down at the bottom, we have Agents at 0.2%, Deathwatch at 0.9%, Templars at 1.2%, AdMech at 1.4%, and Grey Knights at 1.7%. So this chart hasn't really changed too much. Death Guard dropped a few point percentages, and Black Templars went up like 0.2%. But overall, for any significant change to happen on this chart, it's going to take a few weeks, and the data slate will be over by then. So it kind of is what it is for the current data slate. And we've talked about it enough, but hopefully moving forward with the data slate that does come out and the changes that can be made, I do think we'll see a little bit of abandonment for those top armies, Death Guard Knights, Chaos Knights. Those armies, once they get nerfed, people will stop playing them. You'll have the diehards who keep playing them, but they'll drop down to a respectable level, maybe 4 to 5% rather than 9% for Death Guard. Then you're going to have stuff like Tyranids and Space Marines. They're always going to be popular, especially if they get a little bit of a boost. You might see them prop up a little bit more as some people are excited to play them again. There's a lot of armies down at the bottom there. They're going to eat up a lot of those players dropping off with Death Guard, so hopefully we'll see a little bit more Sisters, Space Wolves maybe. Grey Knights and Black Templars should go up a little bit. Grey Knights might kind of peter out depending on how the results look, but overall I think it'll be a lot more balanced moving forward, assuming they don't completely buff someone to the point where they're just as good as Death Guard again. All right, now we have the combined stats for the current Dataslate. So again, this is Army win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. And just a quick reminder, XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who went undefeated or only lost one game in a tournament, so 5-0 or 4-1. Again, it's not a perfect stat, but it's a good way to look at how well an army is performing in relation to the win rate. The higher the XOX1, the greater chance you're going to see them at those top tables, better chance to win a tournament. So coming in number 1, we have Imperial Knights, and then we have Death Guard, Thousand Sons, Genestealer Cults, and Sisters. And then down at the bottom, we have Agents, Orcs, Grey Knights, Admech, and Black Templars. Again, Death Guard and Knights leagues above everyone else, like way above everyone else. So not surprising. It's kind of what we expected here. Space Marines is one of those armies that should be pretty much down near Grey Knights and Orcs, but their army representation is 5%, so it's kind of propping them up quite a bit. So they're always going to be a little bit higher in the chart because of that, but if you look at their overall stats there, it's only 11% XOX1 and a 43% win rate. So they're doing pretty poorly, and they should be down probably both right around Grey Knights level there. So Sisters Battle, they're maintaining really good results this data slate. They had a little bit of a down week this week, but it didn't affect them too much. 50.8% win rate, 22.7% XOX1. Really good results. Again, I'm really happy to see them bounce back. Drukhari is another army who kind of been flying under the radar, performing fairly well over the whole data slate there. Or 50% win rate and an 18% XOX1, and even managed a 1.9% representation, which is pretty good considering the state the army's in right now. They don't have a codex. A lot of the models are pretty old and definitely need a refresh, so it's nice to see them doing good. My biggest hope is that we can see some of these armies down at the bottom. I mean, especially Admech. Admech has been suffering pretty much this entire edition. So Admech is one of those armies I'm looking at and hoping something can change. They need more than points changes, because at this point you can't make them any cheaper. They're just going to be basically free, and the army is not designed to be a horde army, but Games Workshop keeps just dropping points and making it a horde army because it's the easiest fix they can do. I don't know if they know what to do with them to sort of give them that unique feel to make them elite, but they're still squishy, and they're in a bit of a messy spot, and they definitely need like either a complete rules rewrite or a data sheet adjustments on some models. There's something needs to be done more than points changes, and if they just keep dropping stuff 5 or 10 points here and there, it's just putting a band-aid over the problem, and it's never actually fixed it for them. So until they can get some actual real changes done, and maybe we'll have to wait till 11th for that, I don't know. I think Admech is always just going to kind of suffer there. Orcs will definitely get a buff this data slate. They've been languishing at the bottom. They're kind of the new sisters who have just been nerfed into the ground, and it's going to take a few data slates to sort of bring them back up, but I expect better results next time, and then probably the next data slate after that, assuming they don't go overboard on any buffs, we'll see Orcs back up into the middle where they kind of belong. Overall, chart looks like it always looks. It's been one of those data slates where it's just been kind of imbalanced and probably not as fun to play, and the tournament scene's probably been a little stale. So, I think everyone's pretty excited for this new one to drop and kind of breathe some life into the tournament scene here. All right, now we have the Army tournament wins for the current data slate, and it's broken down week over week, so each week is colored a different color, so you can get an idea of when each army got their tournament wins. So number 1, we have Death Guard with 34, and then we have Imperial Knights at 18, Chaos Knights at 13, Aeldari at 12, and then we have World Eaters at 10. And then we still have 2 armies without wins, Space Wolves and Agents. I was really hoping Space Wolves was going to get a win with the new codex that came out, but it's not looking like it. There's only a couple weeks left, so fingers crossed we'll be able to pull one out, but even at that point, it's just ones, but it's better than being 0. Sisters has 7 wins so far, so kind of sneakily picking up some wins, kind of sitting in around Guard and Demons. Now, Ashmal Tarim is one of those armies that got 8 wins, and despite their very poor results, there are those faction experts who play them who know how to get the most out of them and will still pick up wins here and there. But overall, the faction has been suffering quite a bit, so I do expect some buffs coming there. I mean, this chart has looked how it's always looked. Death Guard has been running the show this entire time, almost double second place, and it's never what you want to see. This is kind of the chart that's the most indicative of how imbalanced this data slate really is. These numbers line up with all the other numbers, with both Knights and Death Guards kind of taking over and winning almost everything. Unfortunately, it is what it is, but we're getting close to change, so hopefully moving forward, it'll be a lot more balanced. All right, and the first faction focus this week is going to be Black Templars. Got a new codex, so I figured best check in now. We'll see how they're doing, and then we'll check in again with them in about a month to see how things are moving forward, especially after the new data slate drop. But looking at their previous 8-week results, you can see that their army rep, when the new codex dropped, skyrocketed them up over 3 times higher than they had been. They've been sitting about 1% for the last 8 weeks, and now they're at 3.5. So Again, people are definitely excited to play the army, and the win percentage, despite 1 week popping up over 50% there, has been near the bottom, 45 to 46%, but they got 51% this week, so getting good results so far. Stats versus meta average, not surprising. These aren't really going to fix themselves. This Dataslate is kind of too far in, but their winning percentage is a couple percentages below the average. Their army rep is quite a bit below the average there, 3.6 to 1.2. XOX1 is well below, 16.4 versus 11.1. And they have 3 tournament wins versus the 6.6 average, and they did get 2 of them this week, so that would have looked a lot worse if it wasn't for the new codex dropping. So taking a look at the sub-faction player counts there, you can see Righteous Crusade has about 60% of the player base, but most of that is from the index, so you have to take that with a grain of salt. But Gladius Taskforce actually has 23%. You can see that everyone was pretty hyped to play Gladius within Black Templars, so hopefully moving forward we can get some of these other actual Black Templar detachments to get a little more play, but right now Gladius looks like it's the one to go to. And if you look at the sub-faction win percentages, you can kind of see how it plays out there. Gladius is sitting at just under 60%, and everything else is sitting at just under about 50%. So Gladius is getting the best results right now. So moving forward, people are probably going to stick with that one until something else maybe changes. And then for the sub-faction tournament wins, Gladius got 2, and Righteous Crusade picked up their lone other win. Overall, I think the stats are showing an army that has been struggling, but moving forward, I think they'll be in a bit better of a spot, hopefully closer to the meta average. Probably a little bit below with army rep. They'll probably never be that high, and for probably same for tournament wins. But if we can get the XOX1 and the win percentage up to around the averages, that'll put them in a much healthier spot. And any Black Templar players out there, let me know what you think of the new codex. Have you got a chance to play with it? What do you like? What don't you like? What can be changed potentially moving forward to sort of give some of those actual Black Templar detachments a little bit more play as opposed to just sticking with Gladius. All right, the next faction focus is Grey Knights. So this is the other army that picked up a new codex this week. So looking at the last 8-week results there, you can see similar to Black Templars. For the last 4 or 5 weeks, they've been sitting about 1 to 1.5%, and this week they jumped up to 3%. And their win percentage has been anywhere from 40 to 45%, sometimes even lower. Last week they did a 52% win rate, but this week it was back down to about 40%. So the new codex did bring the players in, but it didn't bring the results so far. And the stats versus the meta average there, the win percentage is 44 versus 48.8, so well below. Army rep is 1.7 versus 3.6, is well below. XOX1 is 10.4 versus 16.4, so again, well below. And the tournament wins only have 1 versus 6.6. So overall, they've been underperforming this entire data slate, and the first week results with the new codex didn't really give much hope for an improvement, but it could just be a learning curve, and maybe the Grey Knight players will figure out sort of the best combo there and get some better results moving forward. So looking at their sub-faction player counts there, Warpbane Taskforce, obviously the most popular because it has the most data for the last 8 weeks. And then of the new detachments, Banishers is actually the highest, 8%, so it did get a decent amount of players this week. All the other ones got just a couple players here and there. And if you look at their win percentages, Warpbane Taskforce has a 46% win rate, so it's not great. And then Banishers came in with a 43.8% win rate. So despite being the highest played of the new codex, it didn't have the best results, which is not surprising based on the week they had. Once the new data slate rolls over and they kind of get a fresh start with these charts here, then we'll see how they're really shaping up moving forward. We'll give them a few weeks to get sort of their legs under them, and then maybe some nerfs to all these armies that are currently dominating will help pop them up a little bit as well. And then we'll see Grey Knights in a little bit better spot once the meta settles down and it's not as imbalanced as it has been. And for sub-faction tournament wins, I just picked up one. That was with Teleport Strike Force. So let me know, any Grey Knight players out there, if you've got to use the new codex, what you think, what you like, what you don't like, and we can hopefully talk about some ways you like to see it improved or some ways you think you can play it to get the best out of it. All right, and that's it for this week, guys. Thanks for watching. Big shout out to my Patreon members, Meet the Great, John Gurman, William Viz, and Darby Conrad, and my YouTube channel members, Andrew Stone. If you'd like to join these fine folks, visit my Patreon, patreon.com/warpfriends. Link is in the description below, or become a YouTube channel member right on my YouTube page. Again, I appreciate all you guys. Thanks for stopping by. Good luck in the tournaments coming up this weekend, and I'll see you next week.